and we start looking at the body as a whole rather than individual little pieces. It's like, okay, now we look at it as a whole. It's like, okay, which parts aren't up to par?
Hey guys, really excited for this one, First Optimal Podcast. Coach Eli and I were just talking. I'm like, I should turn on the recording. So you guys may recall Coach Eli if it's your first time meeting him. So he's an expert strength conditioning coach, MMA, Jiu-Jitsu, powerlifting, bodybuilding, physique. So a wealth of knowledge. And we're just chatting about our training and because how old are you again, Eli?
I am 40.
Yeah. So I'm coming up on 44, you're 40. So we're talking about our old man injuries for any of the younger audience or anyone who sees this out there. But we were chatting about, so like a bonehead, I've been changing up my training to get into more kind of jiu-jitsu type combat sport training. And we were working a lot of takedowns, strained my groin, didn't recover it, therefore strained my MCL. And then we were talking about breathing differences in strength. So I think I just think it's a good discussion for people to listen in on, like how to breathe during certain movements. We're going to get into a lot of different topics today with training, with recovery, with supplementation, with, a lot of buzz out there about peptides and all this fun stuff too. We'll kind of talk about, but yeah. So anyways, I thought we would turn on the recording and then pick up where we left off.
For sure. Nice organic way to start the episode.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, the breathing, with lifting, especially if you come from a background where, you're lifting with great intensity, you're getting your breath and you're bracing before that eccentric. And then, you don't want to let out at the bottom of a squat because you're going to get crushed under a good amount of weight. So you start that concentric before you consider letting any breath out, and in jiu-jitsu, if you're not breathing, you're going to gas and you're going to start to figure, your heart rate's going to spike. And then it's a lot harder because you don't get that rest period after that set. You're still in the middle of a round rolling with somebody. So it's a lot harder to get your breath back. And I think that, and you can hear it too. Like if somebody's new and you're moving with them, like, say you're in side control or you're in mount, like you can almost anticipate that explosion because you hear, and they'll get that breath and they'll brace. You're like, okay, here it comes. And, but it's so different. And, the guys that are, so efficient on the mat, we always talk about, skill beats strength and so on and so forth. But when somebody is so efficient on the mat, it's like, that breathing is so constant and it's just so relaxed, and that does play a big role in you gassing out a lot faster.
It's so mind-blowing, like how many things go wrong when you're gassed in any sport, but especially when there's another trained individual trying to find a mistake to catch your arm, to catch your neck, to catch your leg. Like we were talking, just for those listening too, like like a swimmer, as they get more and more fatigued, they actually have to elongate more and try to calm themselves more to propel through the water versus like, of course, like my wife being a swim coach for years, like, of course, like a short sprint, front crawl, whatever, like that's going to be a little different probably, but like the moderate distances, it's more like elongation and pulling through. And it's similar to like that with like that and yoga. And I'm noticing in jiu-jitsu, like in strength training as we were talking before, I was talking to a really, really good performance / physical therapist. So he's a doctor in physical therapy, but he's focusing more on performance. And he's been working with me on like the energy systems my body's used to using and changing up my training. So he was talking about like, you can't do like hypertrophy training, like, or, always this, like 6 to 8 reps or, like squat, but it's great to have that foundation. But now we're working on 2 different types of modalities, I would say, with different energy systems and different breathing techniques, where it's isometrics, and then it's like he calls it chaos training, more like in the bodybuilding world or like the fitness world, we'd call it more like supersetting, but it's kind of like supersetting with the intention of being gassed, but still with good form. So you're not like, I might superset in a bodybuilding function, like with a 40-pound weight, because I'm trying to overload the muscle. Where in this case, I might like keep it at 20 pounds because I want to keep the form integrity, because I know I'm getting my energy system gassed, and then I don't want to round with 40 and injure my back or something.
Right. Yeah.
So
I, you know, with a lot of my clients, I like to do a blend. So I will have those type movements in there, but I do like having some basic strength movements in there as well. And my thought on that is this: it's, you know, if, you know, you think of like a truck, okay, and you've got like this 6-cylinder truck, all right, it's going to have to work so much harder to pull that trailer than say a V8 or even a diesel, okay, because it doesn't have the horsepower. So it's going to, you know, it's going to drink more gas than normal, all these things. Whereas like that V8 or even that diesel is going to work so much less hard because it has the power to move that more efficiently, more easily. So I like doing a blend of that, just simply to, one, have that base power, so that, you know, when we are in those positions that, you know, even though we're not trying to, you know, force a 1 rep max, you still have that base power. So you're not going to be as fatigued from moving those, but then also blending in some of that, you know, you referred to it as chaos training, but blending in some of that to where we are still, you know, moving weight, low rest periods, supersetting, and so on. But I do personally, and I've found great benefit with my clients in having a blend of that, just because, you know, still being able to, you know, move that heavier weight. And obviously, we're not training like power lifters, but heavy's a relative term, right?
right.
So being able to move that, strengthening the tendons, the ligaments, the bone density through that, um, and getting that base power, and then having that base power kind of as the platform to now begin to, you know, do these other things with, so that, you know, strength is never a weakness.
Right.
It's you know, if you know, we everybody talks about the technique and the strength, you know, but if you have two guys and they're similar size and similar technique and so on, but one guy's much stronger, he wins.
Yeah.
You know, so that is, you know, that is the thing. So
It's no, it's definitely interesting because like even like I wouldn't call this, like, I don't want to misrepresent his training, but I would say like a happy in between was been like a simple adjustment of like single limb, like single leg and
absolutely,
single
yeah.
arm, where he was saying like
Mhm.
start with that, because then at least it's like a longer set under the same load, but you're splitting
Yes.
it. So it's causing my
Mhm.
energy system, like, hypothetically, if I'm doing a, just for simplicity, if I'm doing a bicep curl of 8 reps for a heavy weight, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
like, yeah, but if I do 8 reps that's heavy here, and then I do 8 reps that's heavy here, the muscular load, the tension on the muscle itself is still relatively heavy, but what's on my
Right.
cardiovascular system
Yeah.
is longer. I have to hold that same
Exactly.
output for 16
Mhm.
seconds versus 8. I mean, again,
Exactly.
I'm sure there's some, it's not an exact translation, but
No, I know
like,
exactly what you mean. Yeah. And
yeah,
then, and in that way too, you know, like you can even consider while the left arm is working, that's the right arm's rest period. And sometimes I'll even do that. Like I'll go back and forth, you know, like, um, you know, say I got somebody doing dumbbell rows. Well, I'll have them do the right arm, and while the right arm's working, that's the rest for the left. And then they'll go back and forth, and I'll set, you know, X amount of sets, X amount of reps, you know, whatever. And then that's, by the time you're done with it, your heart rate's up, you know, you feel like you've done a lot more work. Um, and it does cut back on some of the weights you can use, because you're not getting those, you know, 90-second, 2-3 minute rest periods. And I think all that's great. And I wasn't questioning the training methods you guys were using. I was simply saying, like, on my part, with some of the things that I do. But I do think that that is a missing piece that a lot of people don't consider when they start switching up, you know. If they've came from a lifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding background, and that's all they've ever trained, you know, are these, you know, closed chain exercises and, you know, straight reps and so on. It is a big difference in how you feel out there when you have, you know, you're moving somebody that is resisting, as opposed to a weight that is very predictable, you know.
yeah, no, and that was the thing, is like, some of it, he hasn't had the opportunity to be as hands-on with me yet. So that's why I was
Sure.
saying I just didn't want to misrepresent what he's doing, because some of it's been in discussion where he'll show me stuff and he'll send me
Absolutely.
stuff. But and I'm always like texting him like, wait, what did you want me to do? Because like what was interesting is and I get a lot of questions about this too, but like uh the how do I put it? So here's one of the questions actually. I'll reframe it is there's a how do you manage the balance between I don't know if you remember this. It was more in the early 2000s. Maybe it's still somewhat prevalent. I don't see it as much, but
Mhm.
we're like, remember you used to have like the guy juggling dumbbells with a single leg on a Bosu ball while he's squatting at the same
Oh
time.
yeah.
There's
Oh
like
yeah.
that craziness stuff.
Mhm.
And they were labeling it functional training. It's like, well, who actually does that every day? Like we're not riding
Right.
unicycles to the, and then juggling our fruit at the grocery store. But the alternative is going back to the single arm thing. Like what I've been working on is like even like a free motion, like single arm press or a dumbbell press for that matter. But the free motion
Mhm.
one, I would slightly take the weight off my right foot, not like floating in the air, like all this crazy
Right.
functional, but to make my back have to press against the mat, the pad to keep my posture good.
Mhm.
And my core, because I'm in my mind, I'm thinking if I'm in someone's guard, I'm extending, like I need this
Sure.
to still be solid.
Mhm.
But how do you handle that with your athletes? The balance between being too cutesy and flash and fun, where like you're not really doing anything, versus like working the actual kinetic chain, getting everything to kind of neuromuscular firing together. If that question makes sense.
Yeah, 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 for sure. So I think a lot of times people, you don't know what you don't know, and there's a lot of, I'll refer to it as unconscious incompetence when it comes to strength training, nutrition, supplementation. Like even with the, you know, optimizing your health. There's so many things that people think they know that they've been taught from a subjective source. A lot of the information they think that they have has came from an advertisement, which is going to be subjective to a degree. Um, but one of the things that I see is, and you really touched on it at the last part of your question there, but working things as a whole, actually learning and understanding body mechanics and learning how your body's supposed to move. When you see these crazy videos with the Bozu ball and the elevation mask and the bands on the head and the dumbbells juggling and all that crazy stuff, a lot of times you have to consider this guy did that for views and likes. That's not how he trains. If it was, he'd be injured pretty quickly. So
Right.
with that, the things that I run into is like, and again, relating it to jujitsu, what really works is very unsexy. Like the basics really work, and the basics are what everybody that is good is doing. So not straying too far from that. It's like, you can have 1,000 submissions that you may know, but if you can't maintain that position long enough to actually apply that submission, they're of no use to you. They're not a tool that you can use. So with the strength training and so on, if somebody is new to it, honestly, just getting them to understand how their body is designed to move and moving mechanically correct, understanding pelvic tilt, understanding their knees tracking over their toes when they're squatting, these type things, understanding how to set their scapula when they're pressing and so on. And then beginning to incorporate, you know, compound movements. That's going to carry over more to jujitsu than just isolation type movements.
Hmm.
Whenever we're isolated or we're in a machine and we're fixed and we can
Yeah.
just work one joint, whatever, um, that's not going to happen in real world scenarios, and especially in grappling. So, being able to have the control, being able to understand the mechanics and, you know, work from positions where, and this is something that I actually discuss a lot with my athletes, but working from end ranges.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big
So
one.
many people, yes, because that's where injuries happen. You think,
Right.
a muscle is the weakest at the end range. Like you think of your squat, where are you the weakest? The very bottom, right? Or on your bench press, you're the weakest at your chest. Those muscles are at their end range. Like for bench, for instance, when I come all the way down and I touch my chest, my pec is stretched out to length, my triceps are stretched out to length, my anterior delta is stretched, and they're all lengthened. And as I begin to press, I'm going to start to feel stronger because those muscles are starting to contract and shorten. So I'm getting, stronger and stronger. That's why you have a lot of guys squatting to half depth and talking about the weight. It's like, well, if you squatted all the way to to depth with that. Could you move it? The issue becomes, a lot of times when people don't understand working from end ranges, you're going to get put in those when you're grappling, and in real world scenarios. Like, you're going to get in an awkward position or something. And if you're not used to working from those positions, that's where injuries tend to happen. When a muscle is lengthened all the way, it feels weaker than whenever it's in that mid range or shortened. And I think, doing that with my athletes, I think is great for injury prevention. You kind of got to check your ego, because when you are working from end ranges, it is going to cut down on the weight you can use. You don't have the mechanical advantage you would if you were just simply half repping something. But, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, but something that I deal with too is people wanting to make lifting movements into or rather make a sport movement into a lifting movement.
Right.
So they want to set up an attachment on the cable and turn it into how they would maybe sit into an arm bar, an arm drag, or whatever. And what ends up happening is all those movements are dynamic, right? Like when we're doing them in an actual grappling setting. And when we're lifting, and you're starting to add weight and add weight and add weight, that's going to slow down that movement. The comparison that I make is, say you have a kid and he can't shoot a 3-point shot because he can't get the ball to the rim. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is give him a bowling ball and have him try to shoot that bowling ball to get stronger. Yeah. Well, that's going to change the mechanics of that movement. He's no longer going to be able to set up and shoot. He's going to start trying to shot put it.
Right.
And when he goes back to shooting a basketball, those mechanics are gone now. He can't, so I think sometimes you have people that don't know, they want to actually try to blend those things. And that's not that's not conducive of growth or, improvement on the mats either. So let your strength training be your strength training, let your grappling be your grappling, but consider in the strength training, obviously if you are a grappler or a specific sport athlete, the lifting is meant to complement. It's not the entree, it's the side dish. It's meant to complement. Right. So, working that in a manner like with, what you said with the chaos training to keep the heart rate elevated and so on, with basic compound movements to help build overall power and explosiveness. Again, those basic unsexy things are what's really going to get someone there and help them, progress faster and avoid injury.
No, and I think like a couple things. In a minute, I want to zoom out to like the high level, but because I don't, because there's a couple things I wanted to get your input on that we were just speaking of, but related to the training. I think another example I've seen is I did some strength conditioning work for a swim team for a couple of years, and a lot of the swimmers or a lot of the coaches, when I started researching programming, these were not strength conditioning coaches. I think they're best of intention, coaches in the weight room, swim coaches being in the weight room, but they were like trying to simulate. They're trying to simulate a stroke or, whatever, and setting up on like on a pull down or whatever. And I'm like, well, instead, so like for those who don't have a strength coach, like look at the prime movers of the movement and then strengthen those in a fixed environment. So like, maybe it's a close grip bench press, or maybe it's a tricep press down because you're pressing down through the water to swim, or maybe it's, some kind of retraction of the shoulder blade movement or lat, whatever the muscle, but really focusing on the prime mover in a controlled environment. So you can not have it as dynamic, so that when you are dynamic, to your point, like there's more force that those prime movers can push you through the water or push through that movement. I think there's there's a balance there, it seems like, of like
very much
a little bit. Like for me, I've been working more like my core, and if there is a way to not get too cute and fancy and work my lower body into it, or like something as simple as like, how can I get strength in my shoulder with like static resistance or isometric resistance with a little bit of lower body and core control. Well, if I press a heavy kettlebell above my head and just walk with a wide stance, and just walk forward and backwards, like that is like, I can feel like all these stabilizers doing it, but it's not too cute. Like I'm not hopping with the kettlebell on one foot like a rabbit, because that would be a little too cute. Not probably. Instead, the injury risk is up here and the results are the benefits here, right? So am I following, kind of tracking what you're saying there?
Absolutely. And even like in that case, doing a shoulder press from a kneeling lunge position, engaging your core from that position, like, one knee on the mat, one foot up, and being able to, get in that position. And even doing things like that unilaterally, like even a farmer's carry. If I'm carrying something in my right hand, my left obliques are going to have to contract to keep me from just tipping over.
Right.
So, you're absolutely on point with that.
One of the one of the selfish things I want to interrupt you on, and just to ask, because I'm going to bounce around a lot because there's so much we can talk about.
No, let's go.
But so like a big thing I'm working on is like hide the arm, cross gripping, and then as I come back, what I'm realizing I'm getting better at it, but like to switch the cross grip, but I gotta make sure my core and my hips follow, because I was doing just the upper body and then getting smashed, So like I've been trying to work on a little bit more like kettlebell, again, without getting too cute and fancy, but a little more of like making sure I have to use my hips with a movement, like almost like I haven't been doing this, but almost like I would say like a rotational press maybe or something. Like, how do you work on if someone is trying to simulate a rotation with the force? You know what I mean? Like, without getting too fancy with it. Like, is there a happy medium where you can kind of still work a little bit of strength, but you're working some rotational? Or would you split up to like just press single plane and then go over here and do a rotational thing for your core?
So that's a great question. So, just for power, we want to have some sort of pressing in there for we are stabilized. That's going to be the thing with power is you see a lot of guys, they'll want to use like a bamboo bar when they squat, thinking it's going to make them, their squat jump up, or they'll be on like a balanced ball, like Bozu ball or something doing squats. Without stability, it is going to be hard to have any sort of power. So if we can't exert ourselves into that bar and we can't really, really drive into that bar for the sake of trying to balance, it's going to be very hard to see a lot of strength gains. Now, again, that being part of the workout, then also we can bring in some other things. Even like from what you're saying there, like even a simple Turkish get up, having to turn and move from there. I like to actually, do rotational work for core. Simply, grab a handle on the cables, hold it at arm's length, and walk out from it. And then, just even that isometric, walking out. Even that isometric is going to help.
If you were to scale back, just if I can jump in on that, just in case someone's listening to like that, maybe is not a grappler and they're like, this is a little too advanced, but if you were to scale it back, would you use that at a lighter load with someone who's maybe struggling with like lower back issues or like
100%,
core?
100%.
Yeah.
So something that we use the blanket term functional strength a whole lot. And a lot of times so I don't train a lot of one-on-one clients anymore because I'm so busy with the coaching. But I still have some that come in here at my gym. I'm in my office right now, but I've have some that come in here at my gym and they've been with me forever. And, and then I'll bring in different athletes from time to time to address something. But, if somebody is just simply wanting to get in better shape, wanting to be able to move better, feel better throughout their daily work, whatever, these are all things that we have to consider. What does he do? What's he doing? And where are the imbalances at? So, like looking for imbalances in somebody who is an athlete is going to be key in optimizing their performance, right? But also just in daily life. For instance, here's an example. I had a gentleman this morning and he is a business owner, entrepreneur, and his low back's been real tight. It's been bothering him. Okay. Well, he had been a while since I'd worked with him, and I began watching him do his squats, and he has anterior pelvic tilt when he's squatting. Well, when he bends down to pick something up, he has anterior pelvic tilt. Okay. We'll come to find out because of recent changes with something, he's been sitting a lot more. So with sitting, his hip flexors have been shortened. Now, when you stand up, so you think of your pelvis, and on the front side of it, you've got, the hip flexor that can pull it down and so on. On the back side, you've got your lumbar erectors at the top of it. And when they shorten, it's going to pick the back of it up. So if the hip flexors are tight, it's going to draw the front of your pelvis forward and down. And then the lumbar erectors are going to shorten and they're going to stay activated all the time.
Yeah. Now, that happens with me. It's happened a lot since Dr. Manny's been fixing me. Shout out to Robotic Rehab Relief.
But so here's the thing from that. Now, that doesn't seem like that big a deal in daily life. Okay, here's where it becomes a big deal. When we have anterior pelvic tilt and the lumbar erectors are shortened, the pelvis turning up lengthens the glutes. And we talked about it earlier, but muscles are weaker in a lengthened state, right? So when our low back is arched and our butt's turned up, right, our glutes aren't going to activate the same way. So we pick something up off the ground.
Yeah.
Our low back is going to be under so much stress because our glutes can't activate and help it. Even standing. So we're walking around and we're standing with anterior pelvic tilt. Our low back is going to be engaged the whole time. So imagine like you're just walking around and you've got your water bottle and you're just walking around holding it all day. Well, that's not a heavy load, but 6-7 hours of that bicep is going to be feeling terrible. Now, that's your low back holding up your upper body weight. Now, when we start getting outside of that and we're doing things that are strenuous, you're on the farm working, you're in the yard, you're doing whatever, and you bend down to pick something up and that low back is super tight, the glutes don't activate, whatever, you're going to call on that low back almost exclusively with no help from your hips at all. And then that's where injuries will occur. So a lot of times, even with deadlifts, so you've got guys and they say, yeah, like I hurt my low back deadlifting, I probably rounded. No, you probably didn't round. You're probably arched in your low back and then the glutes didn't activate. The low back's holding everything. And then you finally worked into a weight that pulled and actually lengthened those lumbar erectors against stress, against them contracting, and then you strained them. So
it's funny you said that though. If I could jump in on that a little bit on the back, because I've seen, I don't want to misrepresent, but I've been fortunate to talk to some really, really high level powerlifters. Gosh, I don't want to say the name because I don't want to get it wrong if he rounded a lot. Did Ed Cohen round?
Anybody that deadlifts correctly will have some posterior pelvic tilt, because the closer I can get my hips to the bar, the stronger I'm going to be, and also the less stress in my low back.
Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, that's what I was going to say is like, people are thinking, oh, I rounded too much. But if you round and your glutes are firing, if I hear you correctly, then you're not going to have the back issue. But if you round and the glutes aren't firing, just like a slight. Because I would try to fix it with posture, to your point, but it was my glutes.
Yes.
And then I would have someone say, because I know if I'm assessing somebody, I can't assess myself. Like I'd have someone say like, no, like you don't have a flexibility problem. You have like a recruitment. Like you're not, your glutes aren't firing. Like you can get in the position just fine. And I'm sitting there trying to do this. Just let me add more tension on my lower back.
Yep. You're wanting to pull that chest up, and then you're arching in the low back. So like you'll see in squats sometimes, like guys, they'll squat and their legs are fine, but their low back is just throbbing. And sometimes if your butt curls under you too much, we'll call it butt wink. When the butt turns under and you have excessive posterior pelvic tilt. But like whenever you arch in the low back and the butt sticks out, like the girls when they take the video for Instagram and they arch, that's anterior pelvic tilt. And when you have that in your squatting, so you think like, here's your butt and here's your shoulders, that weight's here, it's pulling on that instead of you having, the ability to drive into that weight. So you're just torquing on that low back, the lumbar erectors, even the thoracic erectors. So ideally not. So if we brace in our core, then, and again, we're going back to lifting more so than jiu-jitsu here, but like when I brace hard enough in my core, I can't really round forward too much because my abdomen will not let me. If I get a giant breath and I feel my lungs full, and then I do like a Valsalva maneuver, you familiar with what I'm talking about? It's like you get that big breath and it's like, and then you push like you're trying to sneeze, and your belly expands and you get all that intra-abdominal pressure. You can't round your back like you're doing a crunch. That's why we exhale when we do crunches, is to help expel that air and further contract the abdomen. So you'll see guys that are really good deadlifters, they'll brace through their belly. Their chest will be down slightly. They'll have a little bit of, roundness in the back, and their hips will be under them instead of arched out in the low back. Because again, the closer, deadlift being more leverage, the closer I get my hips to the bar, the more leverage I have and the safer I am. But back to the discussion with him. So I began kind of looking at some things. And when we first began training a while back, he was kind of quad dominant. And then we had to bring his posterior chain up. Well, this time away and sitting and so on, his natural attributes kind of stayed intact, but his hip flexors kind of got tight. Well, I had him sit into a lunge, turn his hips under him, flex his glutes, and begin to lift his hips forward, stretching that hip flexor. And instantly I seen it in his face. He's like, oh, he's like, I feel that all the way to my knee. It's like, yeah, yep. So your hip flexors and your quads are tight, and that's pulling down on the front of that pelvis, and that's causing it to actually tilt it forward. So now the back is up, your lumbar erectors are engaged all the time. So even just standing is going to be uncomfortable after a period of time. And then you think maybe your back's hurt or it's injured, and it's not. It's just constantly under stress. So then we did that. Then I had him roll out his IT bands and that rectus femoris on the outside of his quad. And by the time we were done, he's like, my low back feels looser. And we didn't do anything to loosen his low back. We just simply worked on the muscles that were holding him in that position that were so tight, and that allowed the low back to finally and catch his breath and release. Because like in that case, like you think of the pelvis and you think of the ribs. Ideally, the top of the pelvis and the bottom of the ribs are fairly parallel. Okay, so say this is your butt back here. When we begin to have anterior pelvic tilt, and we arch and it lifts, now we have a open scissor posture. So the pelvis is tilted forward, the ribs are tilted up, and we have an open scissor posture. And then you think the lumbar erectors are responsible for extension in the low and middle back. So, they're just constantly engaged, and then the opposite of that would be if we have posterior pelvic tilt and then we turn the ribs forward, then you have the posture that a lot of people have in grappling where we're rounded forward. And excessive amounts there and not balancing that out can cause issues as well. You'll be tight across your anterior side, your chest and so on. You can't open your back, your chest, and stretch your back, work your back as well.
Now, I want to show this to everybody. And if you're on audio, we're pulling up images of anterior and posterior pelvic tilt, because I think this is really important for people. But yeah, this is a good, I don't really, let's see here. So yeah, this is just kind of showing, is this kind of more what you're.
So that would be anterior pelvic tilt. And that's exactly right. See how his chest is way up and his butt is way up in the back?
Yeah.
And then forward, you have the next one up, you have the opposite. His hips are under him and his chest is forward. And then there at the end, you have that, what I talked about your pelvis and your rib cage being fairly parallel. And that would be considered good posture. The head and everything in line with the spine, in line with the hips, and so on.
Yeah, just pulling up a couple different.
And then when you get tilt, instead of forward and back, when you get it side to side, sometimes that can be other issues. Tight IT band, pulling it off to one side, or there's a number of things that could be as well.
I'm just trying to get this one to pop. It's not really giving me the full image, but anterior, posterior. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense because it gives you the anterior, posterior, like you said, anterior, posterior.
And I see this a lot of times too. So like guys that have grown up wrestling, in that wrestling stance, that low stance, their backs don't get as fatigued because they're more efficient. They're not arching in their low back. You get some guys that go through some wrestling drills, even just hand pummeling or whatever. And by the time they're done with one or two rounds, their low back is just screaming. And it's almost always because they are having that anterior pelvic tilt. They have that arch in their low back. The glutes aren't really holding any kind of stress. The glutes are just lengthened and the lumbar erectors are shortened. So they're holding up your upper body the entire time.
Yeah, and all this is all right here. Yeah.
Yep.
What would be like, so if you had three different choices, you have maybe more than three, but I'll just say like you have activation of an inactive muscle. You have the choice of, I'll call it like stretching or flexibility. Then you have like mobility of the joint. Would you use all three, say before lifting or grappling, like before squatting, or in the other example of like hand fighting grappling, if they had an anterior tilt, would you use one of the other? Like, what does that look like in your, I mean, there might be some nuance to my question. It might not be.
No. I get exactly what you're saying. So let's, so it's going to be a little more difficult to explain that from a grappling standpoint, but from a lifting standpoint, I can keep it far more simple. So let's say I have somebody who has anterior pelvic tilt and they're really struggling with their squat, and I'm trying to help them with that. First and foremost, what I would do is I would stretch their hip flexors. I want to help lengthen those hip flexors so that they can actually get their pelvis in correct position. Maybe we stretch their quads. And then from there, I want to do something to activate their glutes. So maybe some glute bridges, something along those lines to actually help activate their glutes so that they feel them, so that they're firing, so that they can find them easier on their squat. And then, keeping in mind, as they sit down, maintaining that spinal alignment, not allowing them to arch, and trying to find their glutes on that squat. Whenever we have that anterior pelvic tilt, the low back's firing hard, but the glutes aren't. So, some pre-exhaustion of the glutes, at least a few sets to get them firing, and then considering how their hips are moving. So, like,
can I ask you about that? So, because sometimes like pre-exhaustion for some people, like myself, could mean exhaustion. Like, so is it just getting blood flow in the glutes and feeling it, or is it some kind of pre-fatigue? Like, because you're trying to get it to wake up, but if you overtrain it.
Yeah, I was saying, like, I guess similar to a pre-exhaustion type method. Like in bodybuilding, sometimes we'll pre-exhaust a muscle. Like, say maybe you do chest flies before you do bench press, and you're really beating up that chest. Here it would be a matter of just trying to get blood in those muscles so that they can find them easier. Like whenever you have a pump in a muscle, you can really feel it, and it's easier to get your mind into that movement. It's easier to get, that connection with that muscle, so to speak. So, having them do, a glute bridge and hold, or even get them on a glute bridge machine and having them do a few reps there and really focusing on engaging their glutes, losing that arch in their low back, and really getting those glutes to fire and activate. And it's a similar concept to, knees caving in on your squat. Sometimes, we have the knees cave in on the squat. That means they're weak in their abductors. So they got knee pain and they don't know why. Like their knees are hurting, but it's not a knee issue. It's a weak hip issue. You'll see them drop in. Maybe they're quad dominant. They'll drop in and their knees will cave inside of their feet and the quads will activate hard. And then now their knees aren't really in proper alignment over their feet, because the abductors can't take that much weight. So that is going back to our original discussion. When we start looking at the body as a whole rather than individual little pieces, it's like, okay, we look at it as a whole. It's like, okay, which parts aren't up to par? So I want to squat this weight. Okay. So think of it this way. Say you want to squat 500 pounds. All right. Can your quads handle 500 pounds?
Right.
Okay. Maybe your quads can. Can your abductors hold you in position for that? Maybe not. Is my low back in a good position or not? Okay. Are my glutes going to activate for that or not? Are they on par? So you think like, every link in that chain has to be equal for you to move properly. So that's where balance really comes in addressing weak points.
I noticed like a lot of people. So like if their knees are in like this image here, if the abductor is weak, then the adductor is usually tight, is my understanding.
Overactive. Yep.
Yeah. So overactive. So like kind of like we were saying about the hip flexor and the glute, like if you look at the joint, the muscles on both sides of the joint, for a lot of people out there that are maybe can't see this too, it's just if you have one of these, if you have a joint that's going in or out or turning or which is causing the pain. Well, let me take a step back. If you have pain in a movement, there's your sign that something's off. And then look at your joints. And then it's that relationship. Because I know for me, it was a combo of like right now, I'm working on like a little more like adductor strength. And then it was also gosh, what was the other one? It was a lot of my warm-ups right now that he has me doing, and like I said, I might be missing a part of the warm-ups. I don't want to misrepresent his program because I'm going off memory, but like I'm doing like a 90-degree like a Bulgarian split squat almost, but putting all my weight on my big toe and holding that isometrically. Then he had me doing like just a calf raise leaning against the wall, holding that isometrically. And then he had me doing like an adductor, something with the adductor. Gosh, there's one more. But it was all in relation to supporting like the knee joint to get all the other surrounding muscles basically like
Yes.
pre-exhausted or pre-fatigued.
Yep.
Another way to say it, like pre-fatigued in my brain, when I hear the word fatigue, I think like it's too tired now to help support the knee, but it's
Sure.
the opposite, where it's actually like
Yeah.
we're getting blood into the muscle, so it's more
so think of it,
for it.
thinking of it more as activation rather than
Activation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we're gonna turn it on rather than just completely zap it of energy. So it sounds like some of the stuff you're doing, like, are things that I would have somebody do who had trouble maybe squatting in a narrow stance. Like keeping the weight on the inside. So sometimes, like say I have an individual and maybe they're having trouble really bringing their quads in, and we add some narrow stance movements. Well, they struggle to squat with a narrow stance and they want to turn their feet out really wide.
Yeah.
Okay. So what ends up happening there is we're underactive in the adductors, and that's less common that I see. More times than not, they're overactive in the adductors when they're squatting, but sometimes you'll see this. And I'll have them pinch a med ball between their knees and do a wall sit and really activate those adductors. Or even stand on a plate with the inside half of their feet. So like the toe side of their foot off of it, and do squats from there. Even, obviously not going to extreme depths, but whatever motion they can, so that their knees are staying in, and in line rather than bowing out and wanting to get that toe out position to open their hips. So the femur actually has to rotate. The femur will rotate in the hip as you squat. And as you squat, if that, say your IT bands are tight or whatever the case may be, that femur is not going to be able to rotate the same way inside of that hip to allow you to squat with a narrow stance. So sometimes you'll see people, with a little bit wider stance feel a little more comfortable when they first begin because, maybe their hips are a little tight in that manner. But, again, what it sounds like he's doing is addressing, some imbalances with mobility or even, strength imbalances. You coming from a big lifting background, sometimes, everybody likes playing the games they're good at. And if we're trying to lift the most amount of weight, obviously we're going to get in a position that allows us to use whatever natural attributes we feel are our best.
Right.
If I've got really strong glutes and really strong adductors, and maybe my back's not up to par, then I'm going to pull sumo, right? If I've got the ability to get abduction in my hips enough to get close to the bar, then I'm going to do better on sumo deadlift than I would on conventional. Say that, maybe my back is a little better. Maybe I don't have the adductors and so on. So maybe I pull conventional. And if the goal is to move as much weight as possible, then we want to obviously play the game in the way that it's going to best suit us. And unfortunately, sometimes, we ourselves don't see those things, and we allow voids in our training to cause imbalances later. That's why sometimes it's nice having somebody else lay things out, because that'll force you to play the games you're not good at.
And for me, it's more like, how do I put it? Like I enjoy deadlift and squat so much, but I haven't been doing it as much lately because I needed somebody. It's the things before it. It's not even that I'm doing them in the wrong order. I can feel like loosening a muscle that's already looser, or if you will, to use like general terminology, or I'm activating muscles that are already overactive on accident. Like, and that was a big thing that we were working on, and I still need to follow up with them to even refine it even another step further. But it was like he was talking about a lot of what I do is like dynamic warm-ups, like skipping, lunging, high knees, hip openers. And he was like, that's great, but like do them under load and do more isometric, because your muscles are so much, he was just saying like, that's not bad, but it was like another evolution of that would be to actually like load that sucker and hold it. And really like get it working. Because long term, he's like, that'll compound and build more strength in that. And then you won't have to do quite as long or quite as much like dynamic warm up, as I would call it. But
Yeah.
not that the dynamic work was better than me just walking on a treadmill randomly,
Oh yeah.
but it was just still not like as optimal. And then when I would go and squat and deadlift, a lot of mine is this all lower back to where I'm just like, man, like if I do a belt squat, it forces me, I do a wider stance, and it kind of, because the way the weight is, it forces me to force an anterior tilt a little bit more to take the pressure off my lower back, and that feels amazing. But then when I load the bar, not so much.
Yep.
And then same with front squat, I noticed, nowhere near as much pressure on my lower back, but I think it's because of, I'm not arcing as much because I can't.
Exactly. Yep. So whenever we do a front squat or a goblet squat, the weight's in front of us.
Right.
So we naturally want to bring our hips closer to it. So we'll bring our hips in because that feels natural to us. We want to get our hips under us. And a lot of times I'll teach people, like if they've never squat before, I'll teach them to squat with a goblet squat. Like we'll start with a dumbbell, regardless of whatever, and get them comfortable with that. Because the mechanics are easier to grasp, with that weight in front of you. Not to mention too, there's no compression on the spine. Because think of it like a nail, and you're driving that nail down with your hammer. If there's a bend in that nail, whenever I put any force on it, that bend is going to exaggerate because that's the compromised section, right? So whenever I hit that bent nail, that bend is going to get worse and worse. It's not going to bend the other way. I'm not going to just hit it on the top and it bend the opposite direction. No, it's already, I'm going to lose the force there. So you think of your spine like that nail. All right, it's already bent here, for that anterior pelvic tilt. You're already arched. Here's your butt. So when you push, it's just going to further stress that arch in your low back. So a lot of times, I think the setup a lot of times is where people miss it. Like they'll walk out, they'll get, whatever, the bar is resting in their hands and sitting on their back. They'll get that breath and they'll start to push their hips back, and they're trying to keep their chest upright. And that's going to force that. Even their head position, they'll be looking up. I struggle with this with a lot of guys that lifted for football in high school. They'll want to come out, they'll have their feet straight like train tracks. And then they'll be arched in their back, they'll be looking at the ceiling, and it's just their back is so like max extension.
Yeah.
And and then they're struggling to get their heels to stay on the floor, and then they don't know why their low back is hurting. Well, when they were 17, 18 years old doing that, youth was in their favor and their joints are a little more supple, and now they're 40 doing it and it's not quite as forgiving. So
Can I ask you a question right there just before you move on? What do you usually tell somebody with that? Because I think as kids we were told like look up when you squat, and then we're told look straight, and then there's been others who are like look down. Do you adjust based on the pelvic tilt, or do you usually just say like a straight look? Like what do you usually do for like, so if you're taking it from the head, sorry to cut you off, but you take it from the head down, like what are the cues you teach?
Okay. Well, like say we're wrestling. All right. Why am I using a collar tie? To get control of the head, right?
Yeah.
If I can control your head, I can control your spine, right?
Yeah.
So say I'm going off say I want this arm, and I turn your head away from it. It's going to be hard for you to turn into that arm with your head turned away from it, because I've got your spine compromised, right? So your head is the end of your spine. You can control your spine with your head. So you think if you were going to do a backflip, you would lead there, right? You'd throw your head back and you'd jump. You wouldn't try to do a backflip with your chin tucked.
Right.
So again, you lead with that. Now, if I'm throwing my head way back, I'm almost always going to arch my back. So I think of just keeping my head in line with my spine.
Yeah, just neutral.
Exactly. I just keep my head in a neutral position. Now, here's the thing. As we begin to squat, you have to lean to keep the center mass over your base of support, over the center of your feet, right? So we do have to lean. Now, if I lean and I keep my head, say here I'm looking forward, and I lean and I keep my head looking forward, now I've got extension in my cervical spine, in my neck.
Yeah.
So I find a spot like forward.
Like 45 degree maybe, or roughly?
Yeah. I find a spot on the floor on the low part of the wall, and I just look at it as I go. And at this point, for me, I do it with automaticity because I've done it so much.
Right.
But when I'm working with a client, I try to help them understand, okay, you're going to follow your head in any movement. So what I want them to do is I want them to find a spot on the wall, so that whenever they're in that movement, if you don't move your eyes, you won't move your head. So it's like whenever you're having trouble balancing when you're stretching, find something to look at so your eyes don't move, then your head doesn't move, then you don't lose your balance. So I'll have them fix their eyes on a spot lower, about maybe hip height, and then I'll have them squat from there. Now, again, we're trying to set that squat from every position. So when I unrack, I don't want to unrack slowly. I want to unrack strong, to kind of set the stage and have that mental, like if I unrack it slow, it feels heavy, so I want to unrack it strong so it doesn't feel heavy, so that I feel confident,
Right.
And then once I get set, I am reverse. My shoulder blades are back so that I've got my traps flexed and the bar can sit on them, but I'm bending that bar across my back.
Right.
The reason I'm bending that bar across my back is to activate my lats and the muscles in my back. Now, the more rigid I am through my back, the less chance I have of breaking posture. So when I bend that bar across my back, my lats are going to activate. All the musculature around my spine is going to activate. And that's going to keep me from caving in at the bottom. I want to get my elbows as close to my sides as possible. I never want my hands inside of my elbows, but I want my elbows as close to my lats as possible, because again, that's going to activate my lats more. And that's going to be dependent upon somebody's shoulder mobility and so on. From there, once I get set, I am going to externally rotate my feet into the floor. I'm spreading my toes as wide as I can, especially my big toe. The big toe, if it starts to cave in, I'll lose the arch of my foot. So you think of think of your big toe. When it caves in, the foot wants to fall to that side.
Yep.
So sometimes, like you wouldn't do push-ups like this, you open your hands, right?
Right,
It's a bigger
right.
base. So whenever I'm looking and that big toe's caved in, the arch side of that foot wants to cave in and fall. That's going to cause the knees to cave in. So we talk about active feet, spread your toes. I used to always squat barefoot, but like a wide toe box even is great. Something so that big toe isn't just crushed into your foot, because again, that's almost certainly going to cause the arch to drop in your foot. That's going to result in your knees caving in, and then upstream problems from there.
Would you, really quick on the feet, would you just mentally try to think of it? Is there any foot positioning you would modify before starting the squat?
So for me, whenever I get set, once I unrack the weight, I walk out, I get my feet set first. I set my squat from the floor up. I'll get my feet set, I'll spread my toes, and I'll actually try to corkscrew, externally rotate my feet into the floor. And what that does is you'll actually see the knee itself rotate outward slightly.
Just slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Not like a sumo squat stance, just a slight. Yeah.
Exactly. Because I'm, from a squat stance, like a normal squat stance, I'm just outside shoulder width. So you'll see, and from there, like my feet aren't going to be perfectly straight. My feet are going to be barely turned out, and that's going to help open my hips. You'll see these, Olympic lifters from China that can squat with their feet close and straight. Well, that's because they have very shallow hip sockets. For most of us, that's not going to be the case. So we do need some external rotation in the hip to allow us to get down and work from the bottom of that squat. Again, these guys they're not the rule, they're the exception. So whenever you see guys that can have their feet really close and squat down and put their hips on their heels, they have shallow hip sockets. They've worked that for years. Like they were chosen to do what they do because of that. Like the sport, picked them because they're body type. But with that being said, like once I begin to screw my feet externally into the floor, the knee will actually turn out somewhat. And that helps set the stage for me to open my hips and squat. So I want to think about opening from the middle of my hips as I begin to squat. Working my way up, I'm bending that bar across my back. I get my big breath. I'm breathing all the way into my lower abdomen, trying to feel, breathe into my obliques, and I'm getting as tight as I can. If I'm wearing a belt, I'm bracing into that belt. The belt is just an outer sheath for you to brace into. And I'll talk more on that in a second if we need to. But anyway, I'm bracing in my core as hard as I can. From there, I've got my head in line with my spine. I get my breath. I unlock my knees and I begin to open my hips and set my hips down and back, trying to keep all that weight over the center of my feet. And that's another thing I've heard people say, keep the weight in your heels. Absolutely not. You try to jump vertically with your weight in your heels. Your quads aren't going to activate the same way.
I used to do that in high school. That's how I was taught. All my weight.
Everybody was.
Yeah.
Yep. But for you to activate your quads, you need some weight in front of your foot too. Right. So I tell everybody, the weight distributed evenly from the tips of your toes to the back of your heel, but maybe 60% on the outside of your foot. And the reason being is from that, we're pushing out so that our knees don't cave in. You know, if I'm just pushing straight down, my knees may cave in, okay? But if I'm tearing the floor apart, that's the cue that I give some of my lifters. If I'm pressing out like I'm tearing the floor apart, that activates my abductors. That helps the knee track in line with the foot, okay? So the way that my knee is designed, it's designed to move in the direction my toes are pointing. You know, like if I'm lying on my back and I turn my toes off to the side, I can't really bend my knee toward the ceiling. You know, my leg is going to move, you know, in its entirety in that direction. So I want my knee to always be over that center line of my foot. And it can pass my toes. If I've got that range of motion and I've got that good amount of dorsiflexion in my ankles that I can, I'm not so great at that, but if you can, that's great. And then, you know, you can squat through that range, but, you know, getting everything, you know, in line, joint stacking, that term, you know, having everything in line and being able to move efficiently, and not, you know, call on one particular muscle group more than another, not compromise your skeletal system, not compromise connective tissues and so on, using the body as a whole.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I want to pull up some images here, then we'll end on the I think it's the fourth or fifth image, but just for the audience out there, we're going to pull some different images to show people kind of some of the different movements. So these are like some front squat views.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
obviously super depth. These are Olympic lifters.
Yeah.
Right?
The guy at the top looks like he's just shelved it after a clean competition. Yeah. Yep. And that's another thing. You know, if you can't get that depth from a clean, then you're gonna have to pull that bar even farther. So all this is, you know, specific. Like this is, you know, top tier guys.
Right.
And they're trying to move as much weight as possible. So the lower they can get, the less height they have to get on that bar. So they rip the bar up and then jump under it.
And then this is more of a standard kind of front squat.
Sure.
Loads in the front. You can see the spine's kind of neutral. Maybe even, is there anything you see with the posture there you would modify?
So it's, I'm using my phone right now, and it's very small on my phone. I don't know if I can even enlarge it. Yeah. So her spine looks fairly neutral in the bottom. If you were to arch there in your low back and have the anterior pelvic tilt, then you would still have the same fatigue in the low back because it would be overstressed.
Yeah, here was because we mentioned a dumbbell one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or like a single dumbbell in the front is another variation.
Yeah, goblet squat. Yeah,
goblet squat.
Yeah. Typically, when we talk about a goblet squat, like you're kind of holding it like you would a goblet to drink out of, you know, and you can do it with kettlebells like he's doing there and so on.
Yeah. Do you like to hold it this way, or do you flip it upside down, or just depends on the goal?
If it's a dumbbell, then I'll have them hold it from the top weight on it and let it kind of hang through their hands. A kettlebell, that's fine to hold that way. That's not a problem.
And this is a Zercher squat. I was gonna.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I incorporate a lot of Zercher training with a lot of my clients. Zercher tends to have a really good carryover. You're not going to squat as much with a Zercher squat as you would just a typical barbell back squat. But the idea is, you know, your core, your back, your abdomen, traps, everything is subject to that weight. You know, because like when you say you get a body lock on somebody and you pick them up for mat return, you know, it's not like you're not, you know, they're not on your shoulders. You can't just stand. Like you have to engage and lift them up as you drive with your hips. So Zerchers tend to carry over very well. Now, I'll use Zercher movements for a lot of my lifestyle clients as well, because it works the low back so much, and you will help them actually learn how to correct pelvic posture. You know, somebody's not going to hold something in front of them and stick their butt out. They naturally won't do that as much because it just feels terrible that way. And it's a little easier to feel. You know, when they get to the bottom of a squat and they're dropping in, not as much, but when they're just standing there for a prolonged period of time, you know, with the weight in front of them, they'll want to get their hips forward and under it. You know, if you're holding something up for a while, you'll get your butt under it. Because the glutes are big muscles, they're strong. So a lot of times I'll incorporate Zercher carries or even Zercher marches, Zercher squats.
What's a Zercher carry? What's that?
So a Zercher carry, you can do a bar across the bend of the elbow and just walk with it.
Oh, just stand it up, right? You're not squatting at all. I got you.
No, not at all. But your core has to stay engaged the whole time. And this is another good example for what you were talking about earlier about exercises where you're having to breathe throughout. Because you're not going to walk 100 yards with it and not breathe. You know, you're going to be breathing the whole time. And it's going to teach you to maintain intra-abdominal pressure while still breathing. The low back, the middle back is going to be really engaged to keep you from caving forward. And then too, you know, as you're walking, you think, well, your legs are under that added amount of stress as well. So it's a great movement for strengthening the lower back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, selfishly, I want to ask you, like, in my mind, I'm thinking of, so I'm going to set back squat over here for a minute. I got Xerxer squat, kettlebell front squat, standard front squat, belt squat, back squat, I guess, lunge. So I guess I just said 5 movements. Okay. Let's take back squat over here because my lower back's giving me issues when I back squat, so I need to fix it. Would you do some of those in the same day, or would you split them up in a week, or do them in a cycle, like do this for 4 to 6 weeks and do this next movement? Is that like your core movement once a week, twice a week? Yeah, broadly speaking here.
So any of those options above. So let's say that somebody, you know, if their low back is bothering on back squat, but they're able to use a decent bit of weight, then that means a lot of everything else is strong. So that's just more of a posture issue. So are they tight in their hip flexors? Have they had lifestyle changes that have led to that? Like maybe something having they're traveling more, so they're sitting all the time. Okay, so their hip flexors are shortened while they're sitting there, you know, driving 4, 5, 6 hours a day. You know, their hamstrings are, you know, shortened, whatever, when they're sitting there. So when they get up, everything feels tight and so on. Or, you know, whatever the case is. So then it might be addressing that individual's recent change. You know, that's an acute issue rather. More chronic issues, like say somebody's, you know, moved this way for a long period of time, or they've never lifted or something, then it's going to be a matter of teaching them to move correctly before we add any kind of, you know, weight and begin to put a lot of stress on them. So, you know, I think any of those options you said apply, but it would be subject to the individual and their circumstance. You know, so as far as when and how to add those in, you can certainly add them in on your leg day. It's not a problem. You know, if you were to do, you know, because, you know, even walking, carrying weight isn't extremely stressful on the legs. And because with, like, say, a Xerxer carry, I'm not bending, like I'm not flexing and extending in the spine. Rather, I'm just holding it kind of like an isometric as I'm walking. So you think of it like, you know, in the same realm as almost like a plank, like I'm holding that isometric and my core is under tension. Here, the weight's in front of me. And if it's in front of me, that means I have to pull in opposition of it to stay upright, right? If I give into it, I cave forward. So you think, okay, well, what causes extension in the spine? Well, the erectors around the spine. So those are under stress in an isometric hold. You know, so that would be a good way to strengthen the back, especially when someone has, you know, any issues with their spine. Say they've got compressed disc or degenerative disc disorder, you know, degenerative disc disease, whatever the case is. That's not adding any kind of compression to it. I'm not overly extending or overly flexing the spine, but I'm putting a lot of stress on the musculature around the spine to help hold them in that upright posture. And if you don't have room to walk with the bar, you can even do marches. Like you can get inside of the power rack, hold it, and just do marches. You know, lifting your legs.
Would you go forward and back, or just straight, just one spot?
You could stand in the same spot for all that matters. Yeah, and just do marches with it. You know, and again, as you're marching with it, the weight comes off one side and it's exclusively on the other. Yep. In the bends of your elbows. Yep. If you don't have a bar, you can even hold a dumbbell that way. You can hold plates that way. Sandbag, whatever. You know, and again, that's going to, you know, subject the core, the obliques, the core, you know, your abdomen, everything to a lot of stress, but yet in a position that you're not compromising the spine. You know, so the spine again isn't having to flex or extend; it's just having to maintain neutral position. So it's not going to be subject to injury the same way.
No, I was going to say one of my issues was the other day I was doing kettlebell swings to warm up, and I was doing some really light, like rotational kettlebell stuff.
Yeah.
But I found I did a little too much weight on the swings, I think, and my lower back was too fatigued. So when I tried to go to the other stuff, I had to modify and do like more of like a leg press or isometric because like my back was just shot. And so I'm always trying to find that balance of I'm pushing a little too hard in my like activation stuff and I'm recruiting wrong. And then when I go to the core movement, it's like, oh crap, like my problem I just exacerbated and it's even worse now.
Yeah. So sometimes like the order in which we do our workouts can be a big thing there. So let's say say the low back is compromised. It's tight, it's weak, whatever. Okay. So maybe in the beginning, I activate my glutes beforehand. That's going to take stress out of the low back. Make sure my hip flexors are feeling good. Make sure my quads are feeling good so that I can get my pelvis in position. My glutes are firing. Maybe I did some glute bridges, static holds, whatever. Now my glutes are activated. Now I can go through my squats. I can go through whatever. And then when I'm done with anything that is going to, any movement where me compromising my spinal position may risk injury, I want my weak spots to feel okay. I want them to be able to kind of hang in there because they're working in that too, even if it's just simply holding position. And then if I really want to beat it up, maybe I move that to the end of the workout, and then I can really work it to exhaustion because I don't have anything left after that where I may be compromised if it were to give out or be fatigued.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, well, I know we covered a lot of ground. I know we can keep going for probably another couple hours, but I think just to not eat up all of your day, tell everybody how they can find you again, and then I'll add a little bit to it because I think we missed it maybe in the intro just because you've been on a couple times. But yeah, just tell what are your socials, where can people find you, all that good stuff.
So my website, if you have questions about coaching or whatever, you can do an inquiry on my website, elicoffeycoaching.com. That's ELICOFFEY coaching.com. And you can send an inquiry there. There's a lot of information on there. I've, clients that I work with, highlights and et cetera. And then on Instagram, that's my main source of social media that I use, but it is Eli Coffey _. And then my Instagram for the coaching also is Team Bionic. So I use both of those. And of course, I have Facebook as well. It's just Eli Coffey. But the website would be a good way to reach out to me if you have questions about coaching. And again, I post a lot of videos with tutorials and so on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll have all that in the show notes. But thanks so much for joining us today. A lot we unpacked. But yeah, we'll talk after this recording because I know we're probably going to be seeing each other again soon, so we can get some B-roll of the movements that we're talking about, so we can maybe layer those into some content. But thanks everybody for tuning in. Fire your questions over for Eli. I'd be happy to help you out, and we'll have the links to all of his resources, website, etc., in the show notes. So good stuff, man. Thanks again. We'll see you.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.